Well, the Comics Kid 2099 is here once again to talk about another X-Men related video. Today, I want to talk about Wolverine and the X-Men, the death of Wolverine. This is the second half of Jason Latour's very brief run on Wolverine and the X-Men. If you're not extremely familiar with the X-Men, there was a pretty decently long series, like 40-something issues, called Wolverine and the X-Men by Jason Aaron. And then when that series ended, Jason Latour, who is Jason Aaron's sometimes artistic collaborator on some indie books, he came in and did another Wolverine and the X-Men series. But this one only lasted 12 issues, 11 or 12 issues, and this collects issues 7 through 12. So it was a 12-issue series of the next Wolverine and the X-Men series. And I already reviewed Volume 1 a while back, and I didn't think that it was the best thing ever. Mainly, I think, if I recall correctly, I thought it was pretty good. There were some good ideas present, but it was executed in a kind of bad way. It wasn't executed great. I actually liked this volume a lot more than Volume 1, and I think that says a few different things. Number one, I'm thinking maybe that Latour would have been better off if he had just stuck to small 2- or 3-part stories, kind of focusing more on character elements and not trying to do a big long story. Volume 1 was kind of one big story about time travel and destiny and all these big ideas, and it kind of fell apart at the end. I think largely maybe because Latour wasn't really ready to handle something that big. But if Volume 1 had just been 3 2-part short stories about these characters at the school and kind of doing some small stories with them, I wonder if maybe he would have been better off trying something like that. I don't know if Latour has actually written anything else outside of Wolverine and the X-Men, because I know he's primarily known as an artist, but I wonder if maybe he was just trying to be too big and do too much of a grand thing in his one of his earlier writing assignments. But also, it tells me that Marvel really needs to lay off these big, huge events that they do, and DC too for that matter, but since this is a Marvel book, I'm going to be talking about Marvel. This is a 6-issue storyline, and this book is mostly just tie-ins with 2 separate events that were going on practically at the same time. The first 5 issues of this book are all about Wolverine. At first, he's just trying to get his house in order. He gets the feeling that he's going to be dying soon, and so he's trying to set some things right, and then right in the middle of the book, in between panels, Wolverine dies, and that's because the death of Wolverine was its separate event, and this is just a tie-in to that. And if you're reading this and you're expecting Wolverine to die in this book because it's called The Death of Wolverine, you're going to be disappointed because he doesn't die here. And at one point, these characters are talking about eulogizing Wolverine, and I was a little confused. I thought, are they eulogizing him before he's dead? And then I realized that he's already dead at this point. And so that was a very jarring jump, and it's not something that I think that Latour could really handle, because the death of Wolverine was kind of out of his hands. That was a big event in the X-Men world that Marvel was doing, and it kind of interrupted what Jason Latour was doing. And then you also have Axis. The very last issue of this series is a tie-in with Axis. And if you don't know anything about Axis, you're going to be very confused here, because this issue does not do anything to let you know about what's going on there. And I would say it's not really Latour's job to try and promote this event that he's not even writing. I don't know if he was forced to do a tie-in with Axis or if he wanted to, but it really feels to me like Latour was kind of forced to tie in with these stories that weren't his, and so the stuff that he wanted to do in this series kind of fell by the wayside. There are 3 big elements in this series that it felt like Latour wanted to do some stuff with, but he didn't get a chance to because he had to do these tie-ins with Wolverine dying, and then also the Axis storyline. Stuff like Phantom X coming to school to be a teacher, that completely is ignored. All we ever see Phantom X do in this volume is drink himself into a stupor. There's a new student who was introduced in the previous volume called Nature Girl, and she was introduced and had this big mystery about her, but then we don't know anything about her, and she doesn't even appear here. This volume also has Armor apparently losing her powers. I guess something happened to her in Volume 1, and I don't really remember what it was, because it's been a few months since I read that volume, but she apparently lost her powers, and so now she's kind of whining about that and trying to get her powers back, and then that's kind of dropped because the series just abruptly ends. And then you also have Quentin Quire kind of going in a new direction, and he's focused on pretty heavily in this book, but then again it just abruptly stops, and we don't really know what's going to happen with Quentin Quire. Is he going to keep showing up in the Bendis X-Men books? Is he going to show up in Spider-Man and the X-Men? Because that was the sequel series to this. After Latour's Wolverine and the X-Men, you had Spider-Man and the X-Men, and I don't even know what was going on in that series. I don't know if any of the main characters from this book are heavies in that book or not, but it really feels like Latour had all of these things that he wanted to do, and he didn't get a chance to because Marvel cut him off short by killing off the main character of this book. And I feel like this series would have been much more well remembered and much more well liked if Latour had had more time to kind of develop what he wanted to do. And you might be saying, tough cookies. If you can't catch me, if you can't hook me in your first volume, then you don't deserve to keep going. And fair enough. If you're spending, $15 on a trade paperback and it doesn't grab you, I'm not going to tell you that you should keep reading the series and wait for it to get good if you didn't like the first volume. That's fair enough. But at the same time, Chris Claremont worked on the X-Men for 16 years, and he is widely considered to be the author of the best X-Men stories of all time. But if you went back and read the first 6 issues of his run, you really would not think, okay, this guy is going to be on the title for a really long time to come, and he's going to be the author of the best X-Men stories of all time. You would not get that feeling if you just read the first 6 issues that he wrote. And I get the feeling that Latour, I'm not going to say that he would have been the best X-Men writer ever, or that he would have been on par with Claremont or anything like that. I'm not saying that, but I do think that this run would have turned out a lot better if he had had more time to work with what he had here. If he had more time to work with his own elements, and also if he was forced to tie in with these events that were going on. And like I said, I still don't know if he was forced to work on these events, kind of tie in with those, or if he was just kind of wanted to do that. With Wolverine dying, it seems like that's something that he had to do, since this is called Wolverine in the X-Men and not just X-Men. Although somebody online had suggested that when Wolverine died, that this series keep going and they call it something different every issue, like Dupe and the X-Men, or Phantom X and the X-Men, or Storm and the X-Men. I think that would have been a lot of fun, and we could have kept going with what Latour wanted to do, and we could have kept seeing what Latour was doing in this series, because, like I said, what we get here, in my opinion, is pretty good. It's better than what we had in Volume 1. We get some really good Quentin Quire moments. We get a short issue where Wolverine and Storm go into the world, which is this thing that was introduced in Grant Morrison's run on New X-Men, and they basically have an extended date in the world, and I thought that was very fun. We get some good elements here. It's just that it feels like it's being overshadowed by these big events that are kind of taking up space in the Marvel Universe. So that's about all I have to say about Wolverine and the X-Men, Death of Wolverine. Basically, this feels like it's a tie-in to these other stories, and it doesn't feel like it's as much of a story on its own, but I don't think that that's Latour's fault. I feel like that's more Marvel's fault. And I do think that Latour's stories were handled much better here than they were in Volume 1. And it makes me want to go back and reread Volume 1 and see if it's any better, if I just remember it being not that good, or if it did start off being not that good and then the series got better. And it makes me a little frustrated that this series ended as soon as it did, and it already got replaced by Spider-Man and the X-Men, which itself is already over, so that series probably lasted like 6 issues total. It really makes me frustrated that Marvel is so willing to end these series without giving them a chance to keep going a little bit and kind of run on and develop a sense of style and a sense of what it wants to be. And maybe, for all I know, maybe Latour wanted to end it after a year. Maybe he wasn't happy working on the X-Men, but I was happy reading his X-Men, so it makes me a little disappointed that he is not continuing with his Wolverine and the X-Men run after this volume. So that's all I have to say about Latour's Wolverine and the X-Men run. I hope that you guys liked this video. If you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will be back later in the week with some other kinds of videos. So see you guys later. Have a great rest of the day. Catch you then.